Rewind selector. Rewind selector. Rewind selector.
And welcome to the Fred Minnick Show, a live stream that was basically came about because somebody in the whiskey world decided to name a new master distiller today and have a press conference and all that jazz. And we were actually joined by the latest master distiller for Jack Daniels, Chris Fletcher. How are you, sir? How's it going?
Hey, Fred, I'm doing great. As you can imagine, I'm having a great day and super excited and humbled. So thanks for having me.
Now, listen, for those who don't know, your grandpa was the Master Distiller Frank Bobo, and I got to say, I've met meeting your grandfather. He retired. When did he retire? He retired far before, like 89, right?
Yeah.
Yeah,
he 89, retired. July of 89.
So we certainly could not drink back then, or at least, I mean, you may have been able to sneak a little bit having it in the family, but sure in the heck wasn't drinking in my family in 1989. But so you've got... Now, let's tell the truth. Did you get a little Jack Daniels on your gums as a baby?
Well, maybe my grandmother, a lot of people just assume when they hear about my granddad that there was this, mystical moment of when he sat me down and this is how you taste whiskey and all these things. And it didn't go that way at all. I didn't even know, I didn't understand when my grandfather was still working. He retired when I was 8. And so, I didn't realize, the brand and Jack Daniels or even really know what whiskey truly was, until years later. And then, I will say, though, my grandmother may have been known to use a little Jack Daniels as some teething medicine, though.
But the whole point is that Jack Daniels is in your blood. You've been groomed for this moment. But first, I want to take a moment for you to talk about your predecessor in Jeff Arnett. Like, I know that Jeff meant a good deal to you. So, I know it's probably a little bittersweet because you don't get to work with Jeff anymore.
Yeah, it is. That's a perfect way to describe it. Jeff, above all, has become just a great friend. He and his wife Lori, and my wife Ashley. We just think a lot of the Arnett's and their family. They're great people, and he was so great to work for these last 6 years, and he was just a sounding board. Certainly a mentor, and I hated to lose Jeff, and certainly, but certainly wish him the best on his future endeavors. But I think that the best way to describe it is he and I are just good friends, and we align way more often than not when it comes to whiskey. So I'm thankful to have been able to work for Jeff.
Now, you guys, you've been the assistant master distiller there for a minute, and you all got to basically you all were part of bringing Jack Daniel's into like the super premium conversation. While Jack Daniel's has always been the brand that everybody has known, it's opened more doors for American whiskey than any other brand. It's the best-selling whiskey in the world. It kind of got lost a little bit when we were talking about like the limited edition products and the super premiums and stuff. And you all kind of have brought them back and brought that to the forefront in the last 10 years.
Yeah, absolutely. I think our hallmark and the tried and true old number 7, that square bottle and black label, it's often imitated, out there, but that's always going to be our bread and butter, so to speak. However, with the popularity of American whiskeys now, which, I don't have to tell you anything about that, but people are wanting to try new things, and this, drinking for discovery and things like that. And so with our capabilities in Lynchburg, and Fred, I know you've been here several times, but the way we can control our process, grain to barrel or really grain to glass, is such, and it's our strength here. Our traditional mashing processes, yeasting processes, all copper distillation, the mellowing, the making of our own barrels, the operation of our own stave mills. Even, I mean, we have log buyers in the company that are out there, sourcing our oak for us to make our own barrels. And so when you think about the capability that we have here in Lynchburg, and not to mention the team of whiskey makers and the generations of families here in Lynchburg that have been making whiskey, for 150 plus years, it's just so exciting to be able to have the good fortune to step into this role and to continue to look at innovation in this current whiskey market and keep pushing the envelope.
Yeah, we've definitely seen a turn for the better with some of the stuff that you guys are putting out in the bottle. Straight out of the barrel, Jack Daniel's, I would put up there against any distillery in the United States. I mean, there's some amazing honey barrels in there. What are some of the better locations in your warehouses for those kind of like big, bold, caramel laden bourbons? Or I'm sorry, Jack Daniel's.
Well, no worries at all there. The thing about our warehousing here is, we don't cycle anything here, and some distillers do that, and heating the barrel houses up in the winter, and we've experimented with that in the past. I'm certainly not saying it's wrong or bad. That's not what I'm trying to say. It's just not what we've chosen to do here. We don't feel like it's right for us here in Lynchburg. However, I would say, having lived in Kentucky for a dozen years, our heat cycle here is a little bit longer on an average summer. There's been many a morning out there at the Derby in May. It's been pretty cold in the mornings, and usually by early May here, we're pretty darn hot. And then our fall we'll hang on for warm weather. I think last year October 1st it was like 98 degrees down here in Lynchburg. So it creates kind of a really unique climate and environment across our barrel houses. And so for those barrel proof barrels, those are all going to be, a single barrel mark for us. And so it's going to have to be approved by our master panel. We have about 11 tasters that have the ability to come in and approve a batch or a lot of barrels for that product. And so what typically we find, it's always top floor, just because of that heat difference that I was kind of talking about with the season. But there are, I would say, a few houses that would surprise you. You come into Lynchburg, you see the big, tall 7-story houses. And while most of them make beautiful single barrel whiskeys, there's actually some houses that are about half the height, only 4 stories, that sit, in a lower lying area. And, it can surprise you with the type of flavor and color that can be created there. So, while heat and temperature is one factor, it's not the only factor. There's other things that go into it. And that's really where the art and the science of whiskey come together, and what makes it so interesting.
Well, and of course, the art and the science, when it comes to a person, the highest level you can get a distillery by title is Master Distiller. And congratulations to Chris Fletcher, who's just named Master Distiller for Jack Daniel's, the world's best-selling whiskey. If you all are watching and have questions, get them in your chat, whether it's on Twitch, DLive, Periscope, Facebook, or YouTube. We're streaming across all those platforms. If you have a question, I'll see it. I'll pop it up, and we'll ask Chris. But today, really, it's about your journey too, Chris. Like I mentioned, this Jack Daniel's is in your blood. It's in your DNA. Your grandfather was the master distiller here. You've got, there are buildings there named after your grandfather. And as we just learned, you probably came out of the womb and had Jack Daniel's on your gums there shortly thereafter. But I want to tell people about how you got in the industry, because you didn't just come straight into Jack Daniel's. I mean, you worked your way up. You definitely worked your way up. So tell everybody how you got here.
Yeah, I did. And I'm so thankful. Thank you for asking that. Because, growing up in Lynchburg, small town, we're the second smallest county in the state of Tennessee. There's one stoplight in our whole county. So you really don't understand when you're growing up in Lynchburg what Jack Daniel's is, and how people all over the world love our brand, and how we have friends, literally on every continent. And so, I went away to college, still didn't really know what I wanted to do. Was studying chemistry and was unsure. But after my second year, my sophomore year, I came home for the summer. I needed to work a summer job to make some money before going back to school. And my roommate from college wanted to come down and take our tour here, and he said, I want to go see the distillery. I want to learn the process. And so we came down, we were walking through, and I just thought, wow, what a perfect job to be a tour guide. You get paid to talk. That beats mowing grass all summer long. And so I got lucky. They hired me, and I was 19 years old, and learning the history of our distillery. Of course, had my grandfather to learn the process, inside and out. He was such a wealth of knowledge. And that's when the light bulb sort of started to go off. And I started to think, well, okay, the science and the chemistry, it goes pretty well together with the process of whiskey making. And 2 years later, I got lucky, just to be honest, Fred. The Brown-Forman had an opening in the research and development lab. Again, I was 21, 22 years old, moving back to Lynchburg. Not that I don't love Lynchburg. It's a wonderful place to grow up. But when you're in your early 20s, a little bigger town is kind of appealing. And so I moved up to Louisville, Kentucky, and worked in R&D there for several years. In various roles, and got to learn, not only about obviously Jack Daniel's, even more, being as Jack Daniel's is the largest brand in our company, but also our Kentucky whiskeys, and worked, got to meet people like Lincoln Henderson and Chris Morris, and really learned in R&D how to taste whiskey, from a quality perspective, and had a great time there, learning all these different processes, barrel making, and then had the opportunity to work at some other distilleries around for a few years, and had a great time, had a lot of great mentors there as well. I've gotten to know a lot of great whiskey makers, distillers, blenders, folks in our industry over the years, and they've all had an impact on me. And I've always tried to be a sponge and learn as much as possible. And that all kind of culminated in 2014 when I came back home to work for Jeff. And so the last 6 years have been fantastic, and I've learned so much from Jeff, and he's obviously done a fantastic job in this role. And I couldn't be more excited or honored to be able to succeed Jeff and be our distiller now here in Lynchburg.
And you had a moment at another company, another distillery too, that probably helped, get you into this position as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, had about almost 3 years over with Sazerac as lead chemist, and the folks over there, I've still got a lot of great friends there, and they certainly learned a lot while I was there. Had a great experience. The great thing about it, Fred, is in our industry, it's such a social industry, gentleman's industry, however you want to describe it, being able to learn things from other whiskey makers and things, like I say, it's really kind of helped me take little things along the way over the last 17 plus years that I've been doing this, and that's enabled me to hopefully represent Jack Daniel's and continue to do things here in Lynchburg the way we've been doing them over 150 years.
And I guess, we go down that, but that's to say, folks, that, Chris has definitely earned this. He's worked himself up from tour guide to chief chemist somewhere else. And, you've absolutely earned this. And the questions, man, they're just ringing in. A lot of congratulations to you. A lot of kudos to your colleagues there and the tour guides. But what it comes down to is really people want to know more about the whiskey. DO1, who has a profile pic of a clown. Do clowns freak you out, Chris? They freak me out. Clowns freak me out.
Sometimes.
Not gonna lie. He's got this little, his profile pic is of a creepy clown. It's like, do not meet up with this guy in a dark alley is what I'm saying. But Chris asks, I was a big fan of the Heritage Barrel releases. Do you plan on doing more experimental and premium releases like this going forward?
Yeah, great question. And short answer is yes, absolutely. It kind of, what I was talking about earlier in our process, being able to, make our own barrel, basically sourcing, logs and, controlling, toasting time, temperatures, knowing every day we have our own employees' hands all over our barrels, from log to finished cooperage. And so that Heritage barrel, was basically an experiment in toasting level. And so we dialed back the char and dialed up the toast, which happens before the char. So sort of like a marshmallow, that toasting step is kind of just caramelizing and browning that marshmallow rather than just putting it directly into the flame, which is what charring really is. And so that Heritage barrel really was meant to be a throwback to, what would a barrel have been like when you had sourced it in Jack Daniel times, right? You go back to the 1800s or early 1900s when the processes and everything, well, you probably were not as consistent as what we can enjoy today. I think we would all agree. And so the thought was, well, maybe the chars were a little variable. And if you have a little less char and a little more toast to impart that really rich, creamy brown sugar, almost butterscotch-like flavor and texture to the whiskey, that was certainly an opportunity for us to speak to our barrel making credentials as much as our whiskey making. And so that barrel is certainly something that we want to, continue to tweak and utilize moving forward as well. And, I think you might see some stuff again, utilizing some toasted barrels.
Now, Pete Sabo comes in here, and the folks who are on the stream today are pretty educated with whiskey, and this is one that I think might be that's out there in the market a lot that people talk about. And he asked the question: does Jack Daniel's really not have any barrels in inventory that are older than 6 years old?
Oh yeah, we have barrels older than 6. I don't know where that number would have come from. Typically, what you're going to see on an average, for old number 7, you're going to be somewhere between 4 and 5 most of the time. Now, single barrel whiskeys, since that is one barrel at a time, each barrel is a standalone batch, and there's no mingling or mixing of barrels together. Those are typically going to stay in that barrel a little bit longer. So between 5 and 7. So that may have been where the 6-year came from. But we've got barrels over 10 years old here. Don't know exactly off the top of my head to the day what the oldest would be. But it all varies and depends on the end target, what we want for color and flavor, aroma development to go into the bottle.
So let's talk a little bit more about like your new role here. We've kind of seen the term Master Distiller change a lot, at least what the duties are from when your grandfather held the title. Today, there's a lot more marketing and a lot more PR, a lot more of this kind of stuff, for the title. How much of your job will actually be making whiskey versus marketing the whiskey?
That's a great question. And since this is pretty much my first day on the job, I'm still learning that a little bit. I will say, some more kudos to Jeff, my predecessor. I think he struck a fantastic balance on being here in Lynchburg. It was a priority for him as our master distiller to ensure the quality of our whiskey. And that is certainly, that is also part of my new title, a master distiller and director of quality of Jack Daniel's whiskeys. And so it's something that I'm going to take very seriously. Our management team here, our senior leadership, here in Lynchburg and within Brown-Forman, I think fully agree with that. And so it will be a mix for sure, Fred. You're right. I mean, when my grandfather was the distiller, there weren't many things like this. I mean, there obviously was no YouTube or anything, but I think he did maybe 2 or 3 trips right at the end of his career around this time he retired. And that was about it. It was just full on 100% whiskey making, nothing else. And now you look at things like the innovation opportunities, that the market is wanting and our friends are asking for, that we're going to do our best on. You talk about the opportunity to travel and make new friends for Jack Daniels, especially, when I travel overseas and get to meet people. When you say whiskey in a lot of places of the world, it's just assumed blended Scotch. I mean, that's just the assumption. And so, most people here in the U.S., they think of Jack Daniels as a large brand, and we are a large brand. We are a large whiskey maker, but there's still so much opportunity to introduce our brand to many parts of the world. And so that's a big responsibility as well. So, exactly how it's going to break down, I don't know. But I can tell you, the quality of the whiskey is my absolute number one priority. I can promise you that.
Yeah, one of the things that always comes up with Jack Daniels, and we've had this conversation many times before, but it's definitely not going to be the last time we probably have it. And it's probably not going to be the last time you discuss this today. And that is Jack Daniel's bourbon. And I know you love answering this question.
I do. I find that I almost find like when I'm out in a restaurant or a bar someplace and Jack Daniels is on a bourbon list, like people are like pointing out, oh look, they're like it's a controversy. And I don't really understand why there is a controversy. Tennessee whiskey is bourbon. It is. It meets all definitions, regulations. Any quality test that you want to do on the whiskey, start to finish, will meet any definition of bourbon whiskey. So it's not wrong, right? Tennessee whiskey it's basically just a type of bourbon whiskey. It just happens to be labeled and marketed a different way. And you think about the history of our brand, Fred, and this gets into a little bit of a guess to me, as I know our history. If you think about, Prohibition didn't end in Tennessee for about 5 years late. We didn't start making whiskey until, bless you, until November of 1938. So our friends up in Kentucky, not to mention the distilleries that had medicinal licenses that continued to make whiskey during Prohibition, which we did not have, we were way behind, and we were not the large whiskey maker in the U.S. whiskey scene. We were a small, tiny brand, and I truly believe that the Motlow family, Jack's family that was running the distillery, obviously they believed in the process that Jack Daniel and Nathan Nearest Green together, I would say, maybe perfected the charcoal mellowing process that we know and use today. But they also, I think, wanted to make sure that the package, the name, everything stood out and we were unique on that shelf. Back at that time, just post-Prohibition was probably the other Renaissance golden era of American whiskey making, dominated by bourbon whiskey for sure. So I think there might have been something to that square bottle and black label on the shelf that was labeled Tennessee whiskey and not bourbon whiskey. And so it's just basically a choice that we've always made in, number one, holding true to our history. We are proud of what we do here and how we make our whiskey. Absolutely. And that's why we have always termed Jack Daniel's as Tennessee whiskey and not bourbon whiskey.
Well, I think it's definitely like one of those fun conversations to have, right? Like it's as we've seen whiskey grow from like something that you have at a bar to something you kind of get into. Like now it's almost like, for me, it's like covering sports. You have the same level of interest there as someone might have in a team, and this is one of the great debate questions. So you kind of take care of it every single time it ever comes up to you, and I always love your response. It's always so diplomatic. But
well, hey, I've got a lot of great friends that make great bourbon whiskeys. So
yes, you do. Now, could we ever see, like, in a part of like your experimental collections that you may have coming out, could we ever see a time where you guys don't do a charcoal mellowing process for something that's released in bulk?
That's a tough one. I don't know that we would be wanting. It just depends on the style of whiskey, Fred. Honestly, I think we would do what we feel is right for the liquid. Our rye whiskey. 70% rye in the grain bill, brand new charred oak barrel, all the regulations. It is straight American rye whiskey. We do charcoal mellow that, but it's labeled straight rye whiskey. Of course, there is no definition or state code of Tennessee rye whiskey, right? It doesn't exist. Right. And so, however, when we mellow the rye, it is a lesser amount, right? It's a smaller, about 3 feet, as opposed to a full 10 feet that our Tennessee whiskey gets, just basically because the charcoal is really active on a lot of the flavors that corn attributes into the new make spirit. So those heavy corn oils, the sweet kind of cooked corn notes that you get in, a lot of great bourbons out there that you don't really get so much with Jack Daniel's, is what the charcoal works on. And so with our rye, what we found was, with its only 18% corn in our grain bill, the charcoal was just much less effective on that type of grain bill. So with the flavors that we were putting through. And so we found that 3 feet was appropriate. And so, I know it's kind of a long answer, but my point is we don't feel like charcoal mellowing is one size fits all. We do think that depending on the final flavor that we're wanting to put into our product, we're going to adjust that and use that as another tool, right? It's just, as one of our distillers here and, our whiskey making team, it's another color in the palette that we can use to create something. And so we can utilize that. And moving forward, we will. However, I think, if we're making a, corn-based whiskey, bourbon type recipe, I would think my grandfather and maybe Jack would be rolling over a little bit if we didn't charcoal mellow it. So, we'll see, but I have serious doubts that we stray too far from our tried and true process.
Well, maybe one day, but I will say, like, for all the things that you all do, there is one prominent note in Jack Daniel's that I think makes it one of the easiest to identify, like in a blind tasting, and that is the banana note. Like there's always like a really nice prominent banana note, like whether it's a bananas foster or like a dried banana note, but it's like it's almost always there in all your whiskeys, and that's coming from the yeast, yeah.
Exactly right. Yeah, absolutely. So that note that you get is actually a compound called isoamyl acetate, which is an ester it's naturally occurring in fruits, flowers, and things like that. It's what gives you that banana note for sure. That is kind of being driven by our yeast, right? And so yeast is so impactful. I mean, as we all know, it literally makes every whiskey, right? Mm-hmm. Fermentation creates, if it's beer, any distilled spirit or wine, it's via the fermentation of yeast. And so I would say, yes, the yeast creates that. Our yeast is very flavor impactful. And when the whiskey comes off of our still, because we were 80% corn with that classic number 7 grain bill, a lot of that kind of estery, fruity top note, the banana, the apple, pear, a little apricot, it's kind of hard to pick that up because you do have those heavy cooked corn notes that you get from an 80% corn grain bill. However, once it passes through that charcoal and you kind of reduce the load of those oily corn compounds, that's when the nose really starts to pick up on those kind of light esters, because those are very volatile. You know, they're vaporizing at very low temperatures. That's how you're able to pick them up on the nose. And absolutely, I would say our yeast is so impactful on the flavor of what goes into Jack Daniel's. And you're right, Fred. I mean, you could line up, a dozen samples of, bourbon whiskeys and things, and you put Jack Daniel's somewhere in there. I mean, most people would say, well, there's something different there. Even if they didn't know what it was or are familiar with Jack Daniel's flavor, you're right. So, we're a lot of things. One thing that we're not is flavorless. That's for sure. We have a very unique flavor. And it's something that, we hang our hats on, that kind of fruity, estery pop on the nose and on the front of the palate. I mean, it's signature Jack Daniel's.
Absolutely. And like I've stated it 1,000 times, that, the best whiskey for a Coca-Cola, which I think is great for baseball games, football games, like just kind of like hanging out where you're just like chilling. It's basically replacing a beer for me. I always say it's Jack Daniel's because that flavor comes through with the Coke, where a lot of whiskeys do not survive that. The Coca-Cola will overpower it. So anytime I see someone who's a Crown and Coke drinker, it's like, man, try Jack Daniel's, and they almost always are like, yeah, wow, I can really taste it. So, and that's a credit to the yeast and all that good stuff. So, well, I know you got a busy day today, and you have nothing but congratulations coming in here from the chat. A lot of people just wishing you well, excited for the future for you, and I've always believed in you. I've always thought you can make this. I will say that when I figured you were going to be like announced, I was a little nervous for you because I know how big of a job this is, and like this is the biggest job in whiskey, and now it's yours, and that would stress me the hell out.
Well, thanks for that, Fred. I think that was a vote of confidence. I'm going to take it as that.
Yeah, well, you're up for it. You're up for it.
Well, I've been fortunate enough to work for a lot of great people and with a lot of great people, like we talked about, both within our company and outside of this company. And I've had so many great influences. I said earlier, somebody was asking me about my grandfather, and my granddad passed back in January of this year. And, they were asking, you're 39 years old and becoming the Master Distiller Jack Daniel's. And that's, like you were saying, Fred, that's a pretty big job. And I said, you're right. It absolutely is a big job. And, one of my highest priorities is making sure that the families and the folks here in Lynchburg, hopefully continue to have the confidence in me, in this role. And that's, right at the top of my list. But my grandfather was actually 2 years younger than me when he became our master distiller. He was only 37. And so, I've always said he'll forever be my ultimate vision a distiller and a whiskey maker. And so, I'll always think back on times with him and things that he's told me over the years for sure. So I'm very excited, and I really appreciate the time to speak with you today.
Absolutely. Well, I'm rooting for you, and I know most of Whiskey Nation is rooting for you, and I know you've got a big day ahead of you, and you're probably already missing like 5,000 barrels being filled. You might have to go check on that here in a minute, but listen, you've earned it. I wish you all the best, and don't be shy about sharing those samples with me. Like, if you find a honey barrel, just send it my way. I'm happy to taste it.
Don't worry, Fred. Hey, I look forward to a time when we can gather again, and hopefully it comes soon. I know everybody is going through this tough time right now, but would love to have you back in Lynchburg and up here in the Barrel House as soon as we possibly can. And everyone else watching it online, please come and visit us in Lynchburg. We are back open for tours right now. It's certainly modified, and there are some restrictions, obviously, on our tours. But, hopefully as things continue to get better, we all hope that things will continue to get back to normal for our friends and visitors here in Lynchburg.
And how can people find you on social media?
Yeah, that's, jackdaniels.com, actually, our website. And as far as social media, I wouldn't even really know, to tell you the truth, Fred. They don't train you on that as a distiller. You don't get the Twitter quote.
Don't you have your own Instagram?
I don't. No, I don't have any social media. So
keep it that way.
I need to get on that, though.
No.
That's going to be second day on the job.
No, if you can stay away from social media, stay away and just focus on the whiskey. I'm dropping my mic. That's it. Stay away. Just focus on the whiskey and let the social media team from Brown-Forman bring you in when they need you.
Exactly. Perfect.
All right, my friend. Well, be safe out there, and I look forward to catching up in person sometime.